Welcome, everyone, to our fantastic Kraus Scholar Series. I'm Rabbi Miller, and I'm delighted to be sharing this time with all of you and with our special guest tonight, who I will introduce in a moment. It is a great thrill to have with us tonight Rabbi Gary Zola from Hebrew Union College, a phenomenal professor of history and the executive director of the Jacob Rader Marcus American Jewish Archives. We'll be talking about Rabbi Zola in a moment, but first I want to thank all those who've helped make this Scholar Series possible. Thank you so much to the Kraus family, to Henry Kraus and to Shirley Kraus of blessed memory, who have made this possible. Thank you, Henry, for going along with our vision in this time of COVID to be able to bring a Scholar Series, bringing these phenomenal teachers to our community via Zoom and really creating a way to engage. Thank you to our wonderful committee whose names you saw earlier on our title card, in particular to Ed and Ellen Woolman and Susan and Joel Pittleman, who are our hosts for our special guest tonight. Thank you to Rabbi Boxman, my partner as on our clergy team, who's been organizing this part of our Decade of Distinction experience, and also to Shana Aronson and Deborah Fidel, who have been a part of planning this whole Decade of Distinction experience. Both Cantor Zoo and I are delighted and honored to be recognized in this way by our community for having been here now for 10 years. It is remarkable for all of us. Tonight is a special experience for us. You see, each one of these Scholar Series experiences has been with someone who I have a connection to, whether it's someone whose work I continue to study and learn from, like Dr. Amy Jill Levine, whether it was the inspiration of Sally Priesand and the egalitarianism of Reform Judaism. Last week, it was with Rabbi Norman Cohen, my thesis advisor, Midrash professor, and later congregant. And this week, we have the great honor of being joined by Rabbi Gary Zola. Rabbi Zola is the Edward M. Ackerman Family Distinguished Professor of the American Jewish Experience and Reformed Jewish History at Hebrew Union College, the Reformed Seminary in Cincinnati. And as I said, he's also the Executive Director of the Jacob Rader Marcus Center for American Jewish Archives. Rabbi Zola is the editor of the Marcus Center's award-winning biennial publication, the American Jewish Archives Journal, and he was the first regular member of the college faculty to receive a presidential appointment to the U.S. Commission for the Preservation of America's Heritage Abroad, an independent agency of the government. All of that is wonderful, but here's what's special to me. I wanted Rabbi Zola to be a part of this series because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be at HUC. When I was applying to rabbinical school, Rabbi Zola was the head of admissions. So he was the one deciding who got in and who didn't get into rabbinical school. So because of him, I am here, and I'm delighted to now have him be here. A couple of years ago, he thrilled our congregation, joining us to teach us all about Abraham Lincoln, as he called him, the Jewish president. It's a great experience to have that. Tonight, he's going to be joining us on a different topic, American Jewish Exceptionalism. Please join me now in giving a warm welcome virtually to my teacher and colleague, Rabbi Gary Zola.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you, Rabbi, so much for that warm welcome. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And if I might, Rabbi Zola, I want to say, I know that you love an interactive experience. You don't just want to be up here teaching us, you want to be interacting with us. And you would do that in person if you could, but since you can't be with you, I want everyone to know about the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen there. That Q&A tab allows you to post questions, and I'll be moderating the discussion. Rabbi Zola's already made it clear he wants me to keep hitting him with all the questions as they come. So send in your questions early and often.
That is exactly right, because you know, I'm afflicted with a disease that's very common to all clergy, and that is I fill the sound of silence with my own voice. And so those of you who are shy and have questions and you think you'll wait till the very end and then ask them, you might be sorely disappointed. So the rabbi is 100% correct. Please just go right ahead and shoot your questions whenever they are. And I've pleaded with the rabbi, just go ahead and interrupt me, because what you have to ask is as important as anything I have to say. Now, before I begin, and I am going to be sharing my screen because I have visuals that I want to bring along with me. I do want to just make a few introductory remarks, or as we like to say, before I speak, I have something to say. Uh, uh, First of all, I want you to know how honored and privileged I feel to be back here virtually. I've actually had the great pleasure of being in your congregation twice, and I'd love to come back again in person, face to face. But I appreciate this invitation, especially on this occasion when the congregation, which has had such an unbelievable, remarkable history, the congregation itself, as a post-war congregation that has just flourished and grown in so many ways. It's always an honor to be asked to come and teach in another community. And not only are we here to celebrate the congregation, but what we're doing, of course, is we're marking a decade of service that has come to you from your cantor and your rabbi. And I do have to say this, and I don't want to also leave out Rabbi Boxman, who actually I hope is out there, because Rabbi Boxman, who I love very much, gave her father and I were in school together, and Rabbi Boxman was my student, did her thesis, an excellent thesis with me. So to all, I want to say, especially though, to Rabbi Miller, my friend, and one of the wonderful rabbis in the American rabbinate, who's very much beloved by his colleagues, and to the cantor. Uh, you all who are our clay kodesh, our sacred leaders, you are the fulfillment, really, of a magnificent dream that Isaac Mayer Wise had when he established our school in 1875. Think about it seriously, folks, all of you who are listening. It was Wise's commitment to this idea that was viewed to be a crazy idea at the time, the idea that if American Jewry was to flourish and to survive, it really would need to raise up its own religious leaders, that to depend upon bringing leaders from Europe, the great seminaries from Europe, was just not going to work, because those folks would really, though they may be scholarly and learned and know their Torah, they just wouldn't have the ability to interact with the American community. Wise knew this long ago, and he worked 25 years to establish a school, and that school is still in existence to this day. And therefore, we would not have Rabbi Miller, we wouldn't have our cantor, we wouldn't have Rabbi Boxman if it weren't for our school. And so I want to salute them. I mean that. And the last thing I'll say before I begin, and I also mean this very earnestly, it's not difficult for a person like me to come into a community and to teach a subject that I work on all the time. And for heaven's sakes, as the rabbi pointed out, I sit on top of the world's largest collection of documentary evidence on the history of American Jewry. I don't even have to go get the material. People bring it to me. And so to be able to come in and talk about a subject that I study and that I write on and that I speak about all the time, that's easy. That's easy. I'm like a visiting fireman. But what the rabbi does, what Rabbi Miller does, what Rabbi Boxman does, what the cantor, all three of these people, what they do, the religious leaders, this is the most important job in the American rabbinate. It's the most important task. That is to be with people day in and day out, to be able to teach them something new every week, and not to give the same talk again and again, to be with people when they're at their high moments, to be with people on their low moments. This is a great challenge. If we didn't have this, then our Jewish community would be impoverished. In fact, I would say it would be imperiled. And so I'm giving thanks. You may be giving thanks for 10 years of devoted service, but I'm giving thanks for my colleagues, for all the good they do for our people and for our future. So thank you. Now, this evening, I promised to talk this evening a little bit about something that I hope will be contemporary and not just from the past. We're going to start in the past, and we're going to get to the present and then to the future. And that's about a topic that, as you'll see in a minute, if you're patient, you'll understand that this topic really relates to quite a bit of what's going on in our world today, and particularly in America. And that topic is the topic of exceptionalism. Now, many of us are familiar with the term American exceptionalism, and that's an idea that was many people subscribe to, and it's an idea that's been made famous in the 20th century uh, by many people. Perhaps the most prominent of all is a very famous sociologist and political theorist, served famously on the faculty of Harvard University, Seymour Lipset, who really spoke about this idea that the American nation, America itself, is unique and is inherently different from all the other nations in the world. One way of putting it is America is the only nation in the history of nations that was founded not on a tribal idea or on the unity of the family of people coming from a certain common heritage, but rather founded, as they would say, on the idea of justice and liberty, founded on a concept of a way of life, and therefore America is, so we're taught, exceptional. Now, this idea of American exceptionalism is often has been challenged and is not universally embraced, but it's a very familiar idea, and we hear it in politics today, and we hear it from our governmental leaders and so forth. I want to distinguish now between that idea, that is American exceptionalism, and another related idea, which I refer to as American Jewish exceptionalism. What is American Jewish exceptionalism? American Jewish exceptionalism is the idea that no other nation in all of the diaspora has provided a Jewish community with more opportunity, with more acceptance, with more embrace, with the chances to move ahead in and to integrate and to become a portion of the people. No other diaspora community has made that possible aside from the United States. And that idea is often referred to as American Jewish exceptionalism. By that I mean that Jewish life in the diaspora, which has often been characterized throughout the course of history as a series of challenges, oppression, loss of rights, and so forth, all sorts of human difficulties, that has all been different in the United States. Now, we are living at a time today when the certitude with which we embrace this idea is to some degree being shaken. And we wonder when we hear about what some people are saying about certain conspiracy ideas that relate definitely to Judaism and to Jewish life and to anti-Semitic tropes. When we worry about our place in American society, which is something many people think about today, we ask ourselves, well, what is the future of this American Jewish exceptionalism? And did it exist actually, or was it only just a figment of our dreams, our imagination? So what I propose to do now is I want to take us back and explore the components of this American Jewish exceptionalism, to look at it a little and to see how it evolved, and then to think about what that might mean for our future. So with that, I'm now going to share my screen. For those of you who are listening in, you should be able probably to adjust the size of the of what I'm going to project, and hopefully this is always every time I go to share my screen, I always say this is an act of faith, because when I hit the share button, God knows what's going to happen. But let's see here. It looks like you are frozen a bit. Oh, my goodness gracious.
Dr. Zola, it says that you are sharing the screen, but we just
Yeah.
don't see anything.
Okay. Well, it looks like I have everything is frozen here. So this is why I always say it seems like it's an act of faith. So what I'm going to do, if it's okay, Rabbi, you're still seeing nothing?
Nope, we are not. It just says you started screen sharing, but we don't actually see what you're sharing. Do you want to email it to me and I can share it for you?
No, I think what I'm going to have to do, because my screen is frozen here. So what I'm going to have to do, I'm afraid, is sign back in, because I can't even get out of my screen. I've had this. Oh, wait, hold on. See what happens here. I don't see anything right now. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I
Now
am
we can
going
see
to,
you.
I don't know what exactly you can. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, all right, hold on. Okay, all right. You can see me again, all right? So
Yep.
now let me try this one more time. I'm going to try this one more time and see if I can share. This has happened to me once before. Let's see if it'll work. Okay, are you seeing the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. You should be seeing the opening slide, right? Okay, good. All right. So, friends, that was just shows you how important it is to have faith. Okay, so what is it that makes the American Jewish experience unique in all of diaspora? What is this American Jewish exceptionalism? Well, I'm going to argue to you that it is based on four ideas that why Jews have felt that in all of diaspora, only in America have we had the kind of reception that we believe we've had. The first has to do with the idea that our presence has been here from the very beginning of European settlement in the North American continent. Many people don't realize that. The first Jew ever to walk on North American territory that's documented, that can be proven, goes back to the year 1585. I remember Dr. Marcus used to say about this man, his name was Joachim Gans. He'd say, so don't tell me about your pilgrim fathers. Compared to my people, they were Johnny-come-latelys. So, but the first Jewish community established itself here in 1654 in New Amsterdam. So Jews have been here from the beginning. It's not as though we came at some later date. We were present at the very earliest phases of settlement from Europe. Now, the next reason why that we have benefited is because we have actually helped to bring the nation into existence. This is very unique. Uh, we're talking now about the American Republic, and Jews were already here. We fought in the American Revolution. Jews participated in it. We supported it in many ways. Not all Jews, but the majority of Jews. And that makes us, if you will, patriots. We were partisans, we were soldiers, and we played a role. Now, the third reason, very important, of course, probably the reason all of you were thinking about to begin with, is the Constitution. When the Constitution was adopted, and in 1787, and the American nation we know came into existence, and the Jews were not mentioned at all in the Constitution. There's no exception for us or against us. It's as if it is the assumption we make as Jews is that we were included in the Constitution. Now, not everybody in those days, and not everybody subsequently has that same presupposition, but we always have. We've always argued the Constitution promises its rights and its privileges to us because we're not mentioned one way or another. So therefore we're included. And there's good reason to say that, because as we know, there are people who were deliberately excluded from the rights of the Constitution, right? So slaves, blacks were not given equal opportunity at the beginning. And that's an ongoing struggle. And then, of course, women were disabled. It took until 1920 until women could vote. So this idea was very important. And the last point I want to make, which is so very important today, is that the rights of the Constitution, the emoluments that we enjoy, are dependent upon what we call, and what the Constitution guarantees, an independent judiciary. And if you don't have an independent judiciary, you cannot pursue your rights. I could show you a variety of nations, including the old former Soviet Union, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. They had quite a remarkable constitution. The only problem was that you couldn't pursue your rights because the government and there was no way to argue with the government and to disagree with it. And so having an independent judiciary, that is what we've been talking about a lot today, the idea that you're appointed for life so that no matter who appoints you, you can make a decision ideally on what's right and what's correct, even if it goes contrary to what the government might want you to do. That's vital to creating an atmosphere that everybody theoretically should be able to get ahead. For these four reasons, Jews have felt that America was an exception, that no other place in the world could we live the way we do, and it's based on these four. I don't want you to think they're the only four, but they're important four. Now, moving
Rabbi
on.
Zola, if I might.
Yeah, please.
You asked for questions. The first one's already come in.
I want them. Yeah, throw it at me.
So Pearl writes to ask, were there Jews before that time in 1585? Were there not Jews that came with Columbus to the New World?
Well, that's a great question, an excellent question. And I thank you for asking, and also for giving me an opportunity to prove that I'm an honest person, that if you interrupt me, I'll answer the question. So, well, you're right. There certainly were people who probably came with Columbus. Now, the person you're thinking about is a man by the name of Luis de Torres, who was on the ship together with Columbus. By the way, there's also the theory, which is, in my opinion, incorrect, that Columbus himself was Jewish. But Luis de Torres was already a converted Jew, meaning he was born Jewish, but he had converted. He was a converso, and so one could argue that he might not really have been Jewish. But the point that Pearl's making is well taken. There probably were Jews before our friend Joachim Gauss in 1585, But the key, and this is always important to people who, an archivist, if you don't have a document, you can't prove it. And that's what I'm coming to right now in what I'm presenting. So based on this exceptionalism, Jews have asserted themselves in the American nation in many ways, and I'm going to talk about three of them now. First, we argue that we are a portion of the people. That's all those points, the 4 points I just made, make us a portion of the people. We're part of the American experience. We are Americans, without question, and we are Jews. And we don't have to argue about what comes first and what comes second and what modifies what. We are Americans and we are Jews. And our ancestors who brought us to this day have argued that all these years. That idea has provided us with three initiatives. One is that we claim, and have always claimed, that being that Jews, Jewish citizens, and the Jewish religion itself has equal footing under the law, has equal status in the American nation. We may be tiny in comparison to our Christian fellow citizens in terms of numbers, demographics, but that doesn't matter. We have the same status because this is because of all the four reasons that I gave you. The second point is that because we have equal status, we also are entitled to advocate for full protection under the law, not only in our own nation, not only in America, but elsewhere. So, for example, if an American goes to another part of the world, that person carries with them the protection of America. And the same should be true of the American who happens to be Jewish. If that person were to go to a place that disables its Jews, that Jew should not be disabled because that Jew is an American and a Jew. And we have fought for that. And that also extends to our argumentation that we have the right to argue on behalf of other Jews in other parts of the world. We could call on America and our government, because we are a portion of the people, and ask our nation to advocate for brothers and sisters in other parts of the world who need our help. And the third interesting point is that because we're a small minority, we're a religious minority, as I pointed out, but we're part of a whole series of minorities. We are very concerned as Jews, and always have been, about majority rule is of course the way it works in America, but there are minority rights that cannot be abrogated. The Constitution, for example, says we have a right to assemble. The Constitution says we have a right to practice freedom of conscience. We have a right to the freedom of the press. Those are things that a government, state or federal government cannot. If the majority of the people say you don't have the right to assemble, that can't be. That's unconstitutional, and that law can't be made. So Jews, therefore, have a strong interest in protecting what we will call minority rights. That is, certain things that are guaranteed to us by our Creator, that so says the Constitution, that cannot be taken away. Now I want to give you some examples in history of that. So let's start with the idea that we are Americans, we are Jews, we have equal footing under the law, and that anybody who argues to the contrary is in fact arguing against the Constitution and arguing against history. So I want to show you this document, which I found and which I love, and I hope you'll love. Since the rabbi can see it, I'm going to call upon the rabbi just so he doesn't get bored with my talk, and I'm going to ask the rabbi to read it. He doesn't need any preparation. It's not in Greek or in Latin. It's in the English language. And so I found this. As you can see, it's dated 1827. It's from Charleston. And it's going to illustrate that first point I made very colorfully. I was doing my research on my PhD back about 35 years ago, and those were days when I couldn't do digital searching. I had to sit and read the newspaper. I was looking for Jews. I was working on the Jews of Charleston, and I see this advertisement to the public, and I look down at the bottom, and sure enough, Mr. Cohen. That sounds like a Jewish name, I said to myself, and then I read the article. And we're going to explore this article now. It was so wonderful. I made a beautiful copy of it, and about a few years ago, I published it in a book that I edited because it's such a remarkable document. So, Rabbi, can I impose upon you, since you're accompanying me on this journey? Would you start reading
Sure.
this beautiful document?
I can certainly do that. From one of the more historic American Jewish communities, the fourth oldest, if I'm not mistaken. To the public, having had a dispute with Dr. Edward Chisholm and feeling myself insulted by an illiberal expression made by him, I applied to a gentleman of respectability and honorable feeling to call on Dr. Edward Chisholm and to demand an apology. If this was not promptly given, then to demand the only redress that honor has long established as the practice in these cases.
All right, now let's stop there. Rabbi, do you know what this man is asking for?
I'm not quite sure. Is he asking for a duel?
Yes, absolutely right. Okay, so friends, as you see, to summarize what the rabbi just read, this man, Mr. Cohen, was insulted by a person called Chisholm. And so he sends his friend and demands an apology. He doesn't want to be insulted. And he says, if you refuse to Chisholm, if you refuse to render an apology, I want a duel. That's what any gentleman in the South in those days would have received. All right. Now we carry on. Rabbi, you're doing brilliantly.
Dr. Chisholm, through his friend, answered that he would give me no satisfaction and that I was not on a footing with him because I was a Jew, nor did he conceive any Jew to be on a footing with him. As such, a subterfuge as this marks the individual, not only with illiberality and ignorance, but with cowardice, and it therefore becomes my painful duty to intrude these remarks on the public in order to expose him to the community in which I live, the place of my nativity.
If you didn't know better, you would think that I concocted this document to prove the very point that I was making. It so illustrates what I was saying. So what does Chisholm say to him? Basically, he says, I don't have to apologize to you. You're a Jew. In fact, I don't have to apologize to any Jew in this nation because you're not my equal. This is 1827. And the response, as you see, is he says, I'm going to take this. Because of that, I have to take out an ad. I'm going to pay for an ad, and I'm going to expose this man in the newspaper for what he is, a coward and ignorant. And he stresses, because this is my community, the place of my nativity. This is where I was born. Now, Rabbi, if you'll read the last paragraph, this is one of the most moving paragraphs and touching paragraphs. Listen to what he says to the community.
The Constitution of the United States and of my native state give me and every citizen of every religious denomination equal rights and equal privileges. Religious distinctions are not known in this country. Members of the same community are valued only according to their conduct in life, and none but a bigot and a coward like Edward Chisholm would attempt to insult a whole nation by refusing that satisfaction which every gentleman is ready to give and to receive.
So there you have it. He basically, he makes explicit the point that I was making. He says that the Constitution gives me, not only me as a Jew, but everybody, equal rights and equal privileges. Now, we all know that that may be an exaggeration because, of course, women in this year did not have equal rights. Blacks did not have equal rights. All sorts of. But the point is, this is what he's advocating, and this is what he says. It's because of that you can't do this to me. You can't treat me as a second-rate person, because this is America, and this is what our Constitution and what my people have been here. I live here. This is the land of my nativity, and so forth and so on. All right. So that's an example of that first point that I gave you. Now, I was going to give you another example, but because of time, I'm just going to go on. And I have a few different examples, and one day maybe we'll come back to this example. Listen to this.
I dared you and challenged you to organize so that the people, if not the president, would drive the money changers from the temple, and you did it. You appreciate the fact, my dear friends, that among other things in the National Union for Social Justice, we are Christian insofar as we believe in Christ's principle of love your neighbor as yourself, and with that principle, I challenge every Jew in this nation to tell me that he does not believe in it.
Now, I presume some of you know that was the famous Detroit priest from Royal Oak, Michigan, Father Charles Coughlin, speaking in the year 1937. And I'm bringing you another example, this time a 20th century example, right? Because I brought you from the 19th century, 1827. Now I'm bringing you from 1937, all right, 110 years later. And we have the same thing happening. We have this man who was a very prominent radio personality who insisted that he was opposed to communism and to socialism, and that he had nothing against, he kept saying, against Jews, except for the fact that most Jews in America were communists and socialists. And as you see, he organizes what he called the National Union for Social Justice, which was a way of saying, you heard him say himself, he sort of cast the Jew as the other, that Americans have a certain idea, but the Jews have a different idea. And so I want you to see now how a very famous rabbi will respond to Coughlin directly in the same kind of venue. Again, I want to remind you, if you have questions or comments as I'm going, you just shoot them over to the rabbi and I will take them. I'm introducing you now, to this rabbi, one of the most famous rabbis of the 20th century, Rabbi Stephen Wise. And the American Jewish Archives, we have 174 recordings of sermons that Rabbi Wise delivered in Carnegie Hall, which is where he held his services from 1910 until his death in 1949. And he took on Coughlin, and the recordings were made because many of them were played on radio. So Wise responds directly to Coughlin. And these recordings, by the way, that you're listening to are between 70 and 80 years old. They've been brought back to life through the magic of digital renewal. And I just want to point out that they do not exist anywhere else except at the American Jewish Archives. So what you're going to hear now, I want you to listen carefully to how how Wise responds to Coughlin. Listen to his argument, because you'll see that in a 20th century venue, it's the exact same argument that our friend Mr. Cohen made in the newspaper 110 years earlier.
Coglinism is the deadliest form of anti-Semitism in America today. And it is that because it is anti-democratic, because it is as anti-Semitism always is anti-American. Evasions, sophistications will not answer the charge. Coglinism is another name for anti-democratic, anti-American, anti-Semitism. Coglinism resorts to a cheap and contemptible trick which must not deceive and entrap the unwary. Coglinism lifts up its voice not to condemn, not to protest, but to explain, to argue, to extenuate. True Coglinism has not explicitly and frankly defended anti-Semitism or Nazism in Germany. It would if it dared. If it dared to affront the conscience of American mankind, it would. It lacks the courage of such unpopular convictions as it has. It implies there is or there may be an excuse for Hitlerism. That excuse is communism. Communism and its menace, and Jews, he adds or implies, are or were the communists in Germany. For the Jew, Coglinism is a regrettable phenomenon. For the Catholic Church, it is a disaster. But above all, it is America's shame.
Now, friends, if you're listening to this, bear in mind this is the voice coming to you from the year 1938. This is the magic of the era in which we live, because we can literally project ourselves into what it was like to sit and listen to Stephen Wise. But the point I just make quickly is you heard him say again, in his own words, what Mr. Cohen said 110 years earlier, that if you're a person like Coughlin and you are accusing the Jew of being the other, not being a part of the American nation, not being a part of who we are, then what you're doing really is you are anti-democratic, you're anti-American, you are anti-constitutional, you're not a patriot, you're the opposite of a patriot. And you know, as he points out that this kind of an argument that's being made is spurious, and so he fights back with it. And bear in mind that the reason we have these recordings is because many of the addresses that Stephen Wise delivered during services at the Carnegie Hall were carried to the radio station, so you get to hear this one little clip. All right,
Rabbi Zola, if I might.
Yeah, please.
A couple people have texted me to ask some questions, and they're curious to know, how do you reconcile this sense of American Jewish exceptionalism, as you've beautifully described it, which seems to place the American Jew in a position where it's part of America's fabric that we should be treated as equal citizens? How do you reconcile that with the growth of anti-Semitism, particularly in the later part of the 20th century, when you would think that these two things would not be able to coexist?
Okay, so that's a great question. And once again, I'm so thrilled and pleased that people are asking questions. Don't be shy. Just keep it going. But the answer to the question is that as difficult as it has been for us to see the rise of anti-Semitism today, it is a historical fact that we have endured anti-Semitism in this country from the beginning. Sometimes this idea of exceptionalism is just the other side of the coin of having to fight this ugly baggage which comes to America with every wave of immigration. In other words, the bigotry of the old world doesn't fall into the ocean. It is carried over to America. And what the point I'm ultimately going to make is that our predecessors who have come before us had two choices in terms of dealing with this reality. They either could say, you know what, the world is all the same. No matter where we are, we're going to be treated the same way. And they would choose what they want to do. They could move someplace else. In the 20th century, we could move someplace else or to Israel or what have you. But what our predecessors have always done is they've argued they will not give up on on what their view is of American exceptionalism, and they fight back. That's the main point. So in answer to this question, Rabbi, the point is not to say, oh, America has been a paradise in terms of anti-Semitism, that only in the 20th century are we seeing what we're seeing. No, we can show you. I mean, think about what Mr. Cohen put up with. Think about what Coughlin, think about during the 50s and the Committee on Un-American Affairs, and I could go on. And there's a whole litany of bigotry that Jews have suffered over the course of American history. Now, I want to give you just one quick example, not to dwell too long on this, of my second point, which is that because of American exceptionalism, Jews have turned to the American government and said, listen, we don't want to go over to Europe and be treated like the Jews of Europe. If we go over to some place because we're doing business or what have you, we want the American government to give us the same protection that it would give to any citizen. And furthermore, if Jews are being oppressed in other parts of the world, we want America to speak up against that. Now, you may say, well, what's so difficult about that? Well, I just ask you, can you give me an example of our Russian or brothers and sisters in the 19th century, the early 20th century, going to the Tsar and saying, look, the Jews of Georgia or some other part of the world, they're not being treated fairly. So would you please, on behalf of Mother Russia, would you help us, or any other nation? That was not an expectation, because the Jews of those communities would be happy just to be left alone and not to be harassed. The idea that the expectation that we would fight, that a host nation would fight for our people elsewhere was very strange. So I want to introduce you to one example of this, and that's this man, Jacob Schiff. Jacob Schiff was a very prominent American Jewish financier in the late 19th, early 20th century, also a very proud member of Reform Judaism. He was a member of Congregation Emmanuel of New York. Schiff was an immigrant. He came here in the 1840s and 50s, late 1840s, early 1850s, and worked his way into the world of finance and became a tremendous success and a huge influence in the American Jewish community and also in America in general. And I just want to prove that by some years after he had met Sergius Witt, who was at one point the premier of Russia working under the Tsar. uh, Schiff and Witt met one another, and later in 1909, about 6-7 years after they met, Count Witt wrote these words about Schiff, and I think it's very telling. Look what he said. He says, "I had never before met such a Jew as Schiff. Proud, dignified, conscious of his power. He declared to me solemnly that so long as the Tsar's government would continue its anti-Jewish policy, he would exert every effort to make it impossible for Russia to get a kopeck from the United States." And see, so this government official from Russia was sort of flummoxed. He never had met any Jew who would dare to speak to him that way or carry himself as if he was a man, because, of course, the circumstances were so different. Now, Schiff was a very privileged American Jew and had made a great deal of money and so forth and so on, but he knew how to exert that influence. Now, just to show you what kind of man Schiff was and what he was arguing for, this second point, in the year 1911, Schiff was a part of the American Jewish Committee. He was a member of the, in its early years, and because of the way that the Jews were being treated in Russia, the American Jewish Committee initiated about a 10-year effort to bring to a close and end a treaty that had been in existence from the 1830s with Russia, with Tsarist Russia, and this was being worked through our government, and many efforts were being made to bring that treaty to an end because the Russian government was so cruel to its Jews and did not treat its Jews with humanity. And eventually, this makes it to the Congress. And by the way, the treaty will be abrogated. It comes to a close in 1911 as a result of these efforts. But the first stage of it is, of course, that the House of Representatives has a hearing on this. And the Committee on Foreign Affairs is meeting, as you can see, in December of 1911. And here's a list of people who were invited to come and speak before that committee. And as you can see, our friend Mr. Schiff was one of those. And I want to read to you just the closing portion of what he told the committee when he testified before them in 1911. It'll give you a sense of exactly what he was arguing for in terms of the rights of Jews in other parts of the world. This is what he said. "Now, gentlemen, this is a chestnut that has come down through the centuries. The question has always been in the same position at the end of every administration. Every administration has claimed that it has done the best that was practicable, but that has not been the case. The best that was practicable was never done. And whatever has been done has not been done at the time that it should have been done. The best that is practicable is to honor and vindicate the dignity of the American people as against Russia and all that Russia stands for. Gentlemen, just think of it. If any one of you may happen to confess the Jewish faith, any American who accidentally was born of Jewish parentage and wants to go to the Far East today and wants to take the shortest route, he must take the Trans-Siberian Railway. And when he comes to the Russian border, he is told, because he's a Jew, no thoroughfare. Well, just think of it, gentlemen. Just think of what that means to an American. In 1914 or 1915, our Panama Canal will be completed. And that great contribution, which the American people are making to civilization and to the civilized world, that will be then open to the commerce of the world. So let us suppose that a Russian steamer comes through to the gates of the canal and that it may be told, you may not pass through. What a howl there would be on the part of the civilized world. Do you see the simile? Are you going to stand for this? Gentlemen, I have finished, and I have only this to beg of you in conclusion. I have little fear that a committee composed, as this committee is composed, of high-minded men, of what the report of this committee will be. But if you wish to vindicate the dignity of Congress, the dignity of the American people, then make your report unanimous. So now these are our predecessors, and this relates to, I think it was Claire's question a minute ago, unless I got the name, I've goofed on the name, about anti-Semitism, bigotry, and the past. You see, he's confronting a problem. Jews in America are being harassed even in Russia, not only the Russian Jews, but even American Jews, and he will not stand for it. He turns to the American government and he says, you need to extend our rights to our people in other parts of the world, and if you don't, then we should bring to an end our relationship with this nation in terms of its treaty. By the way, we use this same technique in the 80s with the Soviet Jews. The same technique. This is the Jackson-Vanik Amendment. So this is the second point. And finally, my third point, and with this I'll bring us to the present and the future, and that is this whole idea of, yes, the majority of the people win an election, they get the government they want, and so forth and so on. But there are certain things that every human being is entitled to, regardless of whether you're in the majority or you're in the minority. And Jews, therefore, have begun increasingly over the period of their history, especially in the late 19th and through the 20th century, to be concerned with civil rights and the rights of others who are oppressed. And so I want to again play another Stephen Wise clip. Some of you may have read Native Son in high school or in college. It's a book that was published in the late 30s, early 40s of the 20th century. It was written by this man, Richard Wright, who was an African-American literateur, a novelist. And very quickly, Native Son is a book about a protagonist whose name is Bigger Thomas. Bigger Thomas is a Negro. He's a black man. And the story, it kind of shows the structural, back in 1940, shows the structural oppression that this man suffers growing up. He ends up getting himself into trouble. He's robbing a house. He doesn't think anybody's home, doesn't think anybody's going to get hurt. And the owner of the house, a woman, barges in unexpectedly, and Bigger Thomas puts a pillow over her face because she's screaming crazy, and he ends up suffocating her. He's then taken to court and ultimately will be convicted of murder, and at the end of the book, he's waiting for his execution. However, Richard Wright, the author in this novel, writes into the book the part of a Jewish lawyer. A Jewish lawyer is engaged as a public defendant to try to justify and help Bigger Thomas from at least not being executed. And at some point in the story, Richard Wright says these words, it puts these words in the mouth of the lawyer. The lawyer says, there is no way on earth that this jury is going to find a way not to execute this man, because the court has chosen a Jew to defend him. And if there's anybody who's disliked and mistrusted as much as the African American or the black man, says the writer, it's the Jew. Now, in the book, this Jewish lawyer tries to defend him heroically, but in the end, he fails. And the book ends with Bigger Thomas waiting for execution. Now, in 1940, Stephen Wise read this book, and he decides he's going to give a book review on it. And he delivers a book review on this story, and I'm going to play just a little clip of it, and I want you to listen to what he says in 1940. This is 14 years before Brown versus Board of Education, and you'll hear Stephen Wise speak for himself.
To me, as I read Native Son, the word and the mind and the understanding and compassionate soul of the Jewish lawyer became to me at one and the same time symbol, rebuke, prophecy, challenge. Symbol of what the Jew should be and do in relation to other races that are oppressed and ground into the dust. And I remember the very sage and shrewd observation personally made to me a generation ago by Israel Zengin, and repeated in one of his last volumes. If only the Jews could forget their own fate, however bitter, and remember and try to better the fate of another, some alien race, such as the Negro race. After all, we Jews, as no other people, we know the heart of the oppressed. And I can't help saying to you, if there be any Jews in this congregation today who hail from the South, they are likely profoundly to disagree with me, but I must speak the truth as I see it. The indifference of the Jew, child of 35 centuries of civilization, his own. The indifference of the Jew throughout the country, save for rarest exceptions, to the fate of the Negro race, is deeply dishonoring to the Jew. I feel a double obligation to every oppressed race and to every wronged man on earth. For I am an American and I am a Jew. All I can say to you as I close is this. The time is come, in part as a result of the writing of this extraordinary indictment of the white race in its study of abnormal criminality. The time is come for Americans to bethink themselves, to think through and over again the whole problem of relations. And I suppose I can't help feeling, what if others fail? What if Christians fail? What if Catholic and Protestant churches fail? Must we fail because they do? Must our Judaism remain a mockery and a pretense? Even if it be true that Christianity, Christendom has suffered oceanic and even infinite wrong, to be laid upon the body and the soul of the Negro race.
Talk, as you can hear, a powerful plea in which Rabbi Wise says, you know, if anybody should understand oppression, it should be us, and that the difficulties that we faced in the course of our history should alert us to the pain and suffering of others. And he says that he doesn't care what other religions do, right? I don't care if the Catholics fail. I don't care if the Protestant fails. We should not fail. I want to just, because I see time is fleeting, and again, I'm urging people to ask questions. I'm going to show just two more documents, and then we'll bring it to a close.
Actually, Rabbi Zola, there is a question that came in.
Okay, great, please.
I don't want to.
No, go right ahead. No, go right ahead.
The questions have come in wondering, American Jewish exceptionalism seems remarkable. How or what have been the moments where you've seen a crossroads for it? What have been the moments that have hinged where we might have seen American Jewish exceptionalism not reach the point that it did? What were some of the key moments along the way? Perhaps they'd like to know with the founding fathers or at other points where really it set us up to be in this position that we're in now.
Well, in terms of, if I understand the question correctly, you know, part of this you have to always remember has to do with the nature of the Jewish community in America itself. What do I mean by that? Well, when we were in the colonial and in the early American period, we were an infinitesimally small portion of the American people. And by the early national period, one might have predicted that there might not be a significant Jewish community in America at all. So what I'm trying to say is that you know, what's characterized bigotry towards the Jew in America has often been connected. The bigotry has often been connected to xenophobia. It has. I'm not going to say that there's been no religious component to this bigotry, but it's often arisen in periods of xenophobia. When Jews are very small in number, there's not much to be afraid of. So we noticed that the rise or waves of bigotry come when Jews become more populous, either in parts of the nation, like when they move to different parts of and suddenly they appear, like 90 years ago, how many Jews were in South Florida? And suddenly, you know, there's a change. Think about it. In the 1840s and 1850s, we had a mass immigration of Jews from Central Europe to this country, and that was a period of time when we started to see a rise in bigotry. One of the biggest rises in terms of Jewish disdain for Jews occurs with the oceanic influx of migrants from Eastern Europe in the 1880s, 90s, 20th century. This was so fearful that it provoked, and I'm not exaggerating, it provoked the closing of the gates with the Natural Origins Act of 1924 and 1925. So in other words, it often has to do with what's going on in the context and the size of our community. When you're only very few people, when there's only one of you, you become sort of an exotic. You know, you're sort of an interesting ornament, nothing to be afraid of. But when you begin to become a presence, I mean, friends, think about how present we are. We are probably today about 3%, maybe slightly less, but not that much less. We're maybe 3% of the entire American population. And now think about how present we are in terms of national activities. how many Jewish figures are involved in government, how many Jewish figures are involved in business, in cultural events, in music. Well, that means even if we're 3%, we are in the mix. We're in the mix, and this causes bigotry, especially at periods of time when you have rise in fear of strangers, fear that the culture of the nation is under assault. This is when we, along with other minorities, are put to the test.
So someone writes in, they're noting that, to borrow from Hamilton, Jews are now in the room where it happens.
Yeah.
The founding fathers like Hamilton and Jefferson envisioned this kind of Jewish exceptionalism, or have we benefited from things that weren't necessarily intended for us?
Well, some of you remember, I think I taught about Washington and the Jews, and remember at that time Jews were a very small number, but the Jews from in that period of time, that is at the founding of the nation, they were very concerned. They wanted to confirm their interpretation of the Constitution, which meant they wanted assurance that the Constitution actually did protect them, and that the fact that they were not mentioned didn't mean they weren't thought of, but it meant that, in fact, it was assumed that they were entitled to these rights. And some of you who remember that the famous letter that the Jews of Newport write to George Washington in 1790, and he writes back. This is one of the most famous documents in all of American history. And they basically, I'm now paraphrasing, they basically say to him, in the context of welcoming him and so forth, they basically say, we're very fortunate to live here in a country, in an America, that gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. That statement they write to the president. And what they're really doing, Rabbi, at that moment is they're saying, isn't that right, George? Isn't that right? And when he writes back and he uses the same phrase that they gave him, only makes it stronger, and he says, yes, you're living in a country that gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. He goes even further, right? And he says to them, because we're not giving you these rights, you're entitled to these rights because they're God-given. He doesn't use God. He says they are your inherent rights. That's the wording he uses. Meaning you are born with them. Well, that made those Jews very happy. But Washington, so there's an example of Washington, but yet there were other founders founders from that generation who viewed the nation as a Christian nation. So we have been fighting this fight from the beginning, and it has waxed and waned. That's an important point. All right, I see we're almost out of time. I don't want anybody, Dr. Marcus used to teach us. My teacher used to say that the mind can absorb only as much as the tushy can endure. And so I don't want to make it impossible for your mind to absorb anything. I'm just going to do two quick documents, and both audible, and we'll bring this to a conclusion. So first, this is during the period of the civil rights period, this next document. And just so you know that synagogues were being bombed in America already in 1957. Here's a listing of 57, 58 when various synagogues were being bombed. And I want to go to number 4, where I'm showing you number 4 in Nashville, Tennessee, in March of 1958. The Jewish Community Center was bombed, and the person who was blamed for that was the rabbi of the Nashville temple, because his name was William Silverman, because he was speaking in the same way that Rabbi Wise spoke. He was talking about the importance of Jews being concerned about the rights of other minorities. And so the JCC was bombed. And the rabbi was approached and said, we shouldn't have services on Friday night because the bombing took place. And a few days later, he insisted that we will have services. Some years later, he was interviewed about this incident. And I'm going to play for you. Goes by very quickly. It's very quick, but listen to what he says about why he decided that there were going to be services and why he was going to preach that night.
And of course, I'll never forget the first Friday night after the dynamiting of the Jewish Community Center. They had threatened to dynamite the temple that night. And I was urged by some members of the Board of Trustees to call off services. And I said the services will not be called off. Anybody who's frightened need not attend services. There will be adequate police protection. Now remember that as you came to services, you had to be identified by police. And you had to show some identification. But we had a packed temple. It was like Rosh Hashanah. And I don't remember the exact title of my sermon. I think it's on record, and perhaps it's in the archives there, but it was that we will not yield. Here was the point that they say, Rabbi, stick to the Bible. Well, this is the Bible. This is what the Bible teaches. Rabbi, stick to the Talmud. This is what the Talmud teaches. Rabbi, stick to Judaism. This is Judaism. And many times as I carried a gun, I thought to myself, well, hey, what am I doing? You're carrying a gun. I'm not a gunsel. I'm a rabbi. My job is to teach Judaism. And I said, damn it, this is Judaism. To defend principle and to fight for principle and not just talk about justice, but to actually work for it.
You see that it's not only an issue of just rights because he's saying because we should worry about the rights of others just because we want to, because of our own self-interest. He's also making the case that our Jewish tradition urges us to do it. He has people saying to him, don't talk about this stuff, Rabbi. Just stick to the Bible. Just stick to the Talmud. And what does he respond? That's what the Bible teaches. That's what the Talmud teaches. That's what Judaism teaches. I have to teach it and speak about it because it's my tradition. So I want to end this evening as we talk about the present and the future by this last clip, which I don't know if you've heard before. This clip is from the March on Washington in 1963, and many Jewish organizations co-sponsored with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference the Great March on Washington with Dr. King. And this man right here, Rabbi Joachim Prinz, was at the time the president of the American Jewish Congress, which was one of the co-sponsoring organizations of the March on Washington. And Rabbi Prinz was actually a refugee from Germany. He was born in Berlin. He was raised in Berlin. He was ordained a rabbi in Berlin. He served the congregation in Berlin, and he was driven from Germany in 1937. And he came to America and served in a congregation for the rest of his life in Newark, New Jersey. And he devoted himself to civil rights when he got to America, and he arose to become the president of the American Jewish Congress. And as a result of that, he became very close with Dr. King. And right before Dr. King gave his iconic address, I Have a Dream, Rabbi Prinz was invited to speak. And he gave a 2-minute, 3-minute little speech, which is rather unforgettable. I want to end with this because this is where the present and the future meet in terms of American exceptionalism. Let's listen to what the rabbi says in 1963, and I'll conclude by connecting it to what I see for the future. Just a few pictures before I play. This is Rabbi Prinz here. And for those of you who can't recognize, this is the late John Lewis. Congressman Lewis standing right next to him. And of course, there's Dr. King in the front row. This is right in front of the Lincoln Memorial. There they are. They went to see the president that day, President Kennedy, Vice President Johnson. Walter Reuther is there from the AFL-CIO. There's Rabbi Prinz. And behind him is John Lewis. Right next to him is Dr. King. So let's listen to what it is that he said.
I speak to you as an American Jew. Our fathers taught us thousands of years ago that when God created man, he created him as everybody's neighbor. Neighbor is not a geographic term. It is a moral concept. It means our collective responsibility for the preservation of man's dignity and integrity. Our Jewish historic experience of 3,500 years began with slavery and the yearning for freedom. I was the rabbi of the Jewish community in Berlin under the Hitler regime. I learned many things. The most important thing that I learned in my life is that bigotry and hatred are not the most urgent problems. The most urgent, the most disgraceful, the most shameful, and the most tragic problem is silence. A great people which has created a great civilization had become a nation of silent onlookers. They remained silent in the face of hate, in the face of brutality, and in the face of mass murder. America must not become a nation of onlookers. America must not remain silent, not merely Black America, but all of America. It must speak up and act, from the president down to the humblest of us, and not for the sake of the Negro, not for the sake of the Black community, but for the sake of the image, the dream, the idea, and the aspiration of America itself. Our children, yours and mine, in every school across the land, every morning pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands, and then they, the children, speak fervently and innocently of this land as a land of liberty and justice for all. The time, I believe, has come to work together, but it is not enough to hope together, and it is not enough to pray together. To work together, that this children's oath pronounced every morning from Maine to California, from north to south, this oath will become a glorious, unshakable reality in a morally renewed and united America. Thank you.
So friends, I think this is a perfect way to summarize this idea of American exceptionalism and American Jewish exceptionalism. If you remember and think about what Rabbi Prinz said in 1963, he said that we have to care about this, not because of the Black community, or in our case, not because of the Jewish community, but because of what really supposedly makes the American nation unique, and that is the idea on which it was founded, the idea of liberty and justice and equality for all. And that if we remain silent, then that dream will eventually evaporate. And what our predecessors, what you've learned this evening, is that our predecessors, the Jews who have been here from the first community in 1654 continuously, they have never forsaken the dream. You've learned, I've taught you this evening, that the nation was never free from bigotry. It was never a panacea for the Jew. The Jew fought and struggled along the course of its history here. But what has been very a clear pattern is that in the face of that, there was an attachment and a commitment to the dream. And as Rabbi Prinz put it, we just can't remain silent. Now we're facing a difficult time. I don't think there's anybody who's on this seminar or who's in our community has any identity, Jewish identity, would doubt that we're not facing a difficult time and that we're seeing an uptick. I mean, the statistics are all there. Now the future is, how will we respond? And all I can say is that we are able, through the magic of the preservation of our past here, which is what I do and what the American Jewish Archives does, we're able to see what our predecessors did and what they accomplished and what they achieved and the path that they hoed so that we would be where we are. You can bet your bottom dollar that 50, 60, 70 years from now, there will be people looking back on us and adjudicating how it is that we responded to the challenges that we face, which are more daunting than other generations have faced, but not all. So Rabbi Prinz said it best. America should not be a nation of onlookers. We owe this, if we are committed to this vision, the aspiration of America, then it's up to us to see to it that America and American Jewish exceptionalism remains as it is. I want to thank you so much, Rabbi, and I want to thank the Pittlemans and the Woolmans for being so outreaching to me and warm and welcoming to me, and thank the whole congregation for the invitation and for those who were able to be with us on this particular journey. So thank you.
And thank you, Rabbi Zola, for this amazing journey that you've taken us on, thinking about American Jewish exceptionalism, going all the way from our origins here in this country to that voice of Mr. Cohen arguing just for himself and his own honor. I don't think I've ever thought of a Jew asking for a duel in a public forum. And to now think that it's become our responsibility to not just think about ourselves and advocate for ourselves, as Stephen Wise did at the beginning of the 20th century, which we advocating and taking that voice to those who are in similar positions of needing to have that exceptionalism as well. It's been a wonderful and powerful experience. Thank you. It's always a delight to learn with you, to see you, and to know that you let me in. So that's how I wound up here. I wouldn't have had my time at Temple Shalom had you not let me in. It's remarkable to see you again and to have you be a part of us. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who made this possible and who's been watching us. Thank you to all of our friends on Facebook, those who are joining us in the Zoom webinar. We hope you'll continue to join us for the final installment of our Kraus Scholar Series on Monday night, as Rabbi David Ellenson will be engaging us. That's this coming Monday night at 7 p.m. Join us for Rabbi Ellenson, the rabbi who has the distinction of having ordained me, as well as Cantor Azu and Rabbi Boxman. So he's responsible for all three of us being ordained as rabbis and Cantor. So we look forward to having Rabbi Ellenson as our final piece of this. And thank you again, Rabbi Zola, for the beautiful teaching night.
Thank you so much. Congratulations to you, to the Cantor, to Rabbi, to congregation. Again, Mazal Tov.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.